Apologies, I forgot to hit the record button on the video when I started, so I'm just pausing in real time when I realized it to show you what I've done. Basically creating an outline of the tree canopy. This is a very unusual tree. It really took my interest. It's mostly hidden by this enormous liquid amber most of the year with its foliage, which has really affected the way this eucalyptus has been able to grow, trying to reach up above it and around it to get the light. But in winter, it's there revealed in all its rather long and twisted glory. I thought it was just a lot of fun and would make a great 10-minute daily drawing exercise to look at hatching to create foliage, to create, though, the overall effect of the leaf canopy. The important thing with this is to realize that we're using hatching to create value, and we're arranging the value, the lights and darks, and every shade of grey in between, to, in a sense, imitate what we're seeing and create a sense of three dimensions. If you think of a cube that's hatched, we do different hatching on different sides that make it look more three-dimensional. If we have a sphere and we hatch in a way to show the roundedness of the surface, and also the fact that light can hit some parts of the sphere but not others. Some parts have a bit of reflected light, which means it's a lighter shade there. Other parts are in quite deep shade, and the sphere will also, and the cube will cast a shadow, which creates a darker value again. Now, it's really no different with this tree canopy, except that it's obviously a much more complex shape than a cube or a sphere. The surface undulates in and out and around and creates some deep crevices. It creates some gaps where we can see the sky through it. But all of these undulations catch the light or stop from catching the light by various means and create various values, various amounts of light and dark. And so we're hatching to create those values. But we don't want to simply create the darks and the lights. We also want to create some sort of sense of the overall shape, the undulations, but in any given spot, what's happening. When we think of a cube, it's easier because the sides are all straight and basically form a plane. With a sphere, it's a little more tricky, but we've got at least a regular curved shape that we can get a feel for with our lines. With this, it's a little bit more complicated because it's not so regular, but that also gives us some freedom as well. We obviously don't have to be exact, but one of the big principles we need to make, one of the big decisions that we need to make, one of the big principles that there are when we draw foliage such as this is to really consider our marks, our individual marks, and to work out, do I want any marks to represent leaves, individual leaves? Because we don't want to do marks that look like a leaf, but they're actually 5 times the size of the leaf according to the scale that we're drawing our photo reference from, our reference tree from. And this is particularly important on the silhouette edges, where the tree is silhouetted against the sky, because that's where we see the shape of the leaves, the way they attach to the branches, and their size relative to the rest of the tree more clearly than anywhere else. So our brain is used to going to the silhouettes of trees to get information about the tree, to understand the size and the type of tree and the type of leaf and so forth more quickly. So I need to pay particular attention to that, and that's why I did those dotted line outlines around the outer edge. I didn't want to do a heavy line. That's not really the effect that we have. Now, it's a bit tricky with the photo because there does seem to be a clear division between the sky and the leaves, and that's obviously a lot to do with the colour. If I were actually to remove the colour from this, there wouldn't be such a huge difference between the value of the sky, which is a very deep blue up the top there, and the value of the foliage. We must never mistake colour for value. So I need to bear that in mind, and that the actual edge is quite a fragmented one. It's actually also a bit lighter because it's catching the light, light's bouncing off the very edge that curves away from us in a certain way that just visually creates a different impression to the rest of the tree. At this point though, if you watch what I'm doing, I'm basically trying to hatch in the shadows. Now, I'm deliberately using very large hatch marks here. And that's because I don't want there to be any doubt that these marks do not represent leaves. But I also know I'm going to be layering hatching over the top of hatching, and therefore they're not going to look quite as simplified or as bold at the end. Because this tree is, if you like, the star event in the drawing, I'm trying to do it with a little more detail, a little more care, a little more moulding of our ability to see the canopy and to get a feel for its shape in the drawing. Now, I also need to make sure I include the branches, and some hatching probably in most cases for some of the branches at least. And you'll notice that I do pretty much all the hatching for the branches horizontally across the, if you like, cylinder of the branch. And that's both because I think it shows the form of the cylinder more effectively, and also it's simply a contrast to the more roughly vertical hatching for the canopy, for the leaves. So it helps to create a distinction to make it look a little bit more different so we can read it better. And I think at this stage we get a fairly good idea of what I'm doing. Now, it's I think important for a scene such as this, for a subject such as this, when we're drawing it in this way, not to try and progress too much of the drawing in any one spot too quickly, because in the end we judge values by the values around it, and we need to be adjusting overall our whole scene. If we look at this, we can see that in the reference, we can see that there's sort of a diagonal line from upper left to lower right, and it's darker under that. So there's more shade happening there. The upper part of the tree is actually casting shadow on some of the lower parts of the tree, as well as shade also happening there. Shade simply because the foliage is turned away from the sun, so the sun can't reach it. But shadows are cast by other parts of the structure or a different structure onto it. And I want to get some nice variation between my dark values. I want to have some very dark sections, and I want to have some lighter sections, and then I want to have some, if you like, bare paper sections, but not so many of those as you might think. So it's controlling our hatching so that we don't do too much too quickly in any one space, which is easy to do. Now, I'm not being super fastidious about trying to get my foliage working exactly the same as in the reference. I draw way too many trees, probably a bit too quickly, to have developed that habit. But what I want is for all my trees to look real. I also need to make sure that my trees look like trees. I don't mean any tree, but I mean particular trees. Particular trees. So that this looks like it's a gum tree, and that's something that then helps us to work out what the marks mean. Different trees have very much a different visual impact, different effect when we see them. In fact, if we know trees, we can often work out what type of tree we're looking at from simply the silhouette shape, from the way the foliage is gathered on the branches, and whether it's one continuous canopy, or whether we can see through and around various clumps. Many Australian trees don't have a heavy, dense canopy that basically is impenetrable when we look at it, but in fact hold, particularly the eucalypts, hold great bunches of leaves in smaller canopies joined often by very long branches and can be a very long way apart from each other. So I certainly don't want to simplify my tree, my canopy, so it starts to look generic. However, this tree hasn't really grown in a natural shape. Its growth has been severely compromised, or its natural growth habit has been greatly affected by the tree that's grown in front of it. Not so obvious in this photo with the bare liquid amber branches. In fact, when I saw this a few weeks ago, when I was walking along the street, my first reaction was, where did that tree come from? And then I realised, of course, it had been there all the time. In fact, it had been there for rather a long time. It's just that I hadn't seen it exposed in this way. I'm using the 0.2mm pen. If you're finding this interesting, please hit the like button and help me out. That would be great. I have a playlist on trees, on all things to do with trees and leaves and plants, whether it's grass or potted plants, all types of trees, fir trees, palm trees, and many, many evergreen trees. So if trees are a bit of a challenge for you, check out the playlist and see if there aren't some there that fill the gaps in your tree drawing knowledge. I've moved to double time now, so there's just a minute or two at this speed. And then you can see the overall impact. So I hope you do have a go drawing this, and of course I'll post this reference photo on my channel community page. So here's my rather twisted looking gum tree. G'day, I'm Stephen Travis. I hope this was fun. I think it's a great exercise for a 10-minute daily drawing exercise. This took me about 15 minutes, I guess, all up. So I hope you give it a go. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.